The rain had stopped, but the streets still shimmered under the orange glow of the streetlights. Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace had just finished a late meeting with the Indiana Guard Reserve. Her government-issued SUV moved steadily along the two-lane highway, windshield wipers ticking occasionally out of habit. The hour was late, around 11:15 p.m., but she wasn't tired. Her mind was still focused, running over logistics from the evening. She didn't expect the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Adrienne signaled, slowed down, and pulled onto the shoulder. No sudden moves. She took a breath, placed both hands on the steering wheel, and waited. Through her side mirror, she saw the patrol car door swing open. The officer behind it walked briskly, hand already resting on his holster. He didn't announce himself. License and registration. His tone wasn't aggressive yet, but it wasn't neutral either. It carried an edge, like she was already guilty of something. Adrienne looked up calmly. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I was pulled over?" "License and registration," he repeated, sharper this time. "I'd be happy to provide those," she said, reaching into the center console slowly. "But I'd like to know the reason for the stop." "You're not in a position to be asking questions," he snapped. "Step out of the vehicle." That was fast. Adrienne froze for half a second. No explanation, no citation, no request, just an order. Still, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue, but something in her instincts clicked into place. The kind that had kept her alive through more than one convoy ambush in Kandahar. "I'm a federal employee," she said evenly, "driving a government vehicle. I'm in uniform, though you may not see it clearly under my jacket. I'm not resisting, officer, but I'm going to turn on my phone to record, for both our protection." The officer, later identified as Sergeant Daniel Mercer, flinched slightly. As she held up her phone, screen glowing to life. "What's that supposed to mean?" he barked. "It means I believe in accountability," she said, her voice flat. He stepped back, one hand still hovering near his sidearm. She could see the uncertainty in his body language now, something he hadn't expected. He wanted fear. He expected submission. Instead, he got silence, calm, and an unblinking lens. The video would later show Mercer demanding she step out of the car without ever stating a legal reason. It would show Adrienne asking clear, composed questions. It would show Mercer performing a sobriety test, even though there was no smell of alcohol, no slurred speech, no erratic driving. Adrienne passed every part of that test. But the way Mercer looked at her, like she didn't belong, like her words were noise, like her identity, her dignity, and her service meant nothing. He didn't see the lieutenant colonel. He didn't see the federal credential on her dash. All he saw was someone who didn't answer quickly enough, who questioned him, who didn't drop her gaze. When he finally let her go, he did it without apology. "Drive safe," he muttered, walking back to his cruiser without another word. Adrienne didn't respond. She pulled back onto the road, hands still steady, face unreadable. She didn't call anyone that night. She didn't post the video online or run to the press. Instead, she filed a formal complaint. The department didn't respond. 2 days later, she requested the body cam footage through official channels. Silence. 5 days later, she was told the footage existed, but that there were delays in processing. By then, Mercer already knew he had messed up, not because he felt remorse, but because people around the precinct had changed the way they looked at him, not directly, not openly, but the shift was there, a subtle chill, like the unspoken recognition that something had cracked. He was bleeding, and the rest could smell it. Back at her base, Adrienne began preparing too, but not for a media storm or a confrontation. She didn't call a press conference. She didn't post a fiery video. She met quietly with her legal team. She reviewed every second of the footage, hers and his. She wrote out a detailed account of everything that happened, every word, every pause, every micro-expression. When her lawyer Delaney Price finally sat down across from her at a plain wooden table, she asked the question most people would have avoided. "You sure you want to take this to court? It's public. It'll follow you." Adrienne didn't hesitate. "Good. Let it." Delaney paused. "Most people would let it go." "I've let too much go already," Adrienne said, her voice quiet but firm. "This isn't just about me." She wasn't looking for a payout. She wanted a public record, a moment that could be referenced, something that showed power doesn't excuse behavior, and that silence isn't the only option. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for every person who'd ever been dismissed, belittled, or bullied behind flashing lights and a badge. The courthouse was smaller than it looked in pictures. Adrienne arrived just after sunrise, wearing her full service uniform. Polished boots, crisp jacket, medals aligned perfectly on her chest. The rank, Lieutenant Colonel, was unmistakable. She wasn't there to make a scene. She was there to be seen. Inside, the room was already filling. Not with reporters, not yet, but with people. Officers from Fort Wayne, a few from the local precinct. Civilians who had heard whispers of a case that was bigger than it looked on paper. To some, it seemed like just another traffic stop gone sideways. To Adrienne, it was a boiling point, years in the making. She sat calmly beside Delaney, her lawyer, while Mercer waited at the defense table. He wore a dark suit, stiff and ill-fitting. His face was blank, but his jaw was tight. He didn't look at her, not at first. When the judge entered, everyone rose. "Be seated," said Judge Cynthia Morales, eyes scanning the room. "Let's proceed." When Adrienne was called to the stand, she stood with the same poise she used when briefing troops overseas. Calm, direct, no wasted movement. The courtroom watched her walk, shoulders square, eyes ahead. Delaney stepped up. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, can you describe the night of January 17th? Adrienne nodded. "I was driving back from a meeting at the Indiana Guard Reserve around 11:15 p.m. I was pulled over by Officer Mercer. There was no erratic driving, no signs of intoxication. I was compliant. I asked reasonable questions. He responded with aggression." Her voice didn't waver. She wasn't dramatic, just honest. "He demanded I exit the vehicle without explanation. When I asked why, he repeated the demand, louder. At that point, I turned on my phone to record the rest of the stop." "Did you ever refuse a lawful order?" Delaney asked. "No." "Did you resist in any way?" "No." "Did you identify yourself?" "Yes. I informed him I was a federal employee and that I was driving a government vehicle." The room was silent. No coughing, no shifting in chairs. Just her voice and the scratch of pens on notepads. Then came the evidence. First, her phone footage. Clear. Steady. Every word, every pause, every subtle raise in Mercer's voice caught. On camera, then the body cam, the jury saw it all. His posture, his tone, his hand hovering near his weapon, even when she remained calm. The unnecessary field test. The dismissive grunt when she passed it. You could feel it in the room. The air changed. Then came the cross-examination. Mercer's attorney, Charles Briner, walked up to the stand. He wore the smile of a man pretending he wasn't on the losing side. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, with all due respect, is it possible?" Officer Mercer was simply following protocol. Adrienne didn't blink. "No." "Is it possible he was concerned for your safety, or for the safety of others?" "I was driving within the lines. I was sober. I was not aggressive. There was no safety concern." Brenner hesitated, then asked, "And yet you recorded the stop. Why?" Adrienne leaned slightly forward. "Because I've lived long enough to know that silence isn't protection. I wanted an accurate record of what happened." Brenner tilted his head. "So you don't believe officers should have discretion during stops?" "I believe discretion must be paired with discipline," Adrienne said calmly. "That badge isn't a free pass, it's a responsibility." That line landed hard. Even Judge Morales paused before continuing. Then Mercer was called, but not to testify. He was told to watch. Frame by frame, the footage replayed. The tone in his voice. The way he stood. The look in his eyes as he spoke down to her. The prosecutor stepped in. "Sergeant Mercer, why did you ask her to exit the vehicle?" Mercer's jaw flexed. "She looked evasive." "Did she disobey any commands?" "She questioned me." "Is that illegal?" Mercer paused. "No." "Did she raise her voice or make threats?" "No." "So what made you escalate the stop?" No answer. "Sergeant Mercer, were you aware she was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army?" "No, not at the time. And if you had known," Mercer swallowed, "I probably would have handled it differently." That was it. Not regret, not apology. Just a slip of honesty he hadn't meant to say. The courtroom went quiet again. Not out of shock, just confirmation. He hadn't seen a person that night, he'd seen an obstacle, but now, sitting across from her, her rank clear, her voice unwavering, the truth was visible to everyone in the room. Still, the trial wasn't over. 3 more days passed, and then came the verdict. The courtroom was nearly empty this time. No military, uniforms, no curious officers, just Adrienne, Delaney, and a few civilians who'd followed the story out of principle. Mercer sat with his lawyer, stiff as ever. Judge Morales looked down at her papers, then up at the room. In the matter of Wallace versus Mercer, she began, the jury has found in favor of the plaintiff. Mercer shifted. Adrienne didn't move. The court recognizes a violation of constitutional rights during an unlawful stop and detainment. Furthermore, the court finds that the actions taken by Sergeant Mercer were not aligned with department policy or basic expectations of professional conduct. No clapping, no celebration, just the weight of accountability. While no criminal charges will be filed at this time, the judge continued, the plaintiff is entitled to damages totaling $35,000. This decision will remain on permanent public record and be forwarded to the Department of Justice and the Toledo Police Department for internal review and policy evaluation. Delaney leaned over. You could have asked for more. Adrienne shook her head. It was never about the money. Outside, Mercer stood near the courthouse steps. A few local reporters had arrived. He shielded his face with a manila folder, said nothing and walked to his car. Adrienne didn't follow. Inside, she checked her phone. Verdict in your favor. Case closed. Delaney caught up. You think it'll change anything? Adrienne stared out the glass doors. I don't know, she said, but maybe next time he pulls someone over, he'll think twice. A week after the verdict, things didn't exactly return to normal, but they quieted down. Officially, Mercer was placed on administrative leave. Unofficially, the whispers started. Inside the Toledo Police Department, rumors spread fast. Some said he'd be reassigned to desk duty. Others claimed this was the beginning of the end. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone knew. Something had cracked. The shield that had always protected him wasn't indestructible after all. Back at Fort Wayne, Adrienne resumed her duties like nothing had happened. She didn't mention the trial, didn't post about it, didn't sit for interviews. She wasn't interested in being a headline. She had people to train, missions to prep, schedules to maintain. But beneath the quiet, her message had spread. Not in quotes or hashtags, but in the way people looked at her. A little more respect, a little more attention, even from soldiers who had known her for years. Captain Ruiz, one of her younger officers, pulled her aside during a break in drills. Ma'am, he said, hesitating, I just wanted to say, what you did? That meant something. Adrienne just nodded. It wasn't brave. It was necessary. Ruiz nodded back, but the weight in his expression said he understood. Because for a long time, people like him, people who didn't always fit the mold, had learned to stay quiet to survive. Now someone had said no more. In the following days, emails trickled into her inbox. Quiet thank yous, not from journalists or higher-ups, but from peers, old cadets, even strangers who had watched. The court footage online, one message stood out. Ma'am, I saw the way you handled that trial. You didn't shout, you didn't fold, you just stood there calm as hell and told the truth. I didn't know we were allowed to do that. Adrienne read it twice, then archived it. She didn't need the applause, but she felt something deeper, a shift, a current changing underneath the surface. She started noticing it at Fort Wayne, too, in the way her team carried themselves, a little straighter, a little more mindful, not afraid but aware. Her senior sergeant, Master Sergeant Cole, a grizzled vet who'd seen his share of ugly moments, spoke up one morning during their weekly operations briefing. We all saw it, he said. Not the trial, the way you handled it. People are paying attention. Adrienne folded her arms. Good, they should. Then came the call from command. It wasn't unusual for senior officers to be asked to speak at training sessions, but this time the request felt different. Not tactics, not deployment briefings. Leadership. When she walked into the hall 2 weeks later, it was packed with new recruits, most of them fresh out of boot camp. Eager, nervous, still getting used to the weight of the uniform. She stepped onto the platform, a small folder in hand. No teleprompter, no slides. Just her and 100 wide-eyed soldiers who didn't yet know what it really meant to wear the flag. She looked around and asked a single question. How many of you think a uniform automatically earns you respect? A few hands went up. Some. Halfway. Some confidently, she nodded. I get why you'd think that, she said. But here's the truth. Respect isn't something you're owed. It's something you prove every day, every choice. Silence. The badge, the rank, the authority. It's not a shield, she continued. It's a weight. And if you can't carry it with discipline, you don't deserve to carry it at all. The room was locked on her now. Nobody fidgeted. Nobody glanced at their phones. She took a breath, then said, When I was pulled over by an officer who forgot that truth, I didn't panic, I didn't yell. I didn't let it slide. I documented it. I filed. I showed up in court and told the truth. Another pause. That officer thought his badge made him untouchable until he saw my rank. Not just on my uniform, but in how I carried myself. She let the silence hang. That's leadership. She closed the folder. No dramatic ending, no grand exit. Just the truth spoken clearly. As she stepped down, a few recruits started clapping, but she didn't stay to hear it. She had work to do, orders to review. A flight briefing in 2 hours. She walked out like she walked in, focused, centered, done. Later that night, one of the youngest recruits, a quiet girl named Jennings, stopped her outside the barracks. "Ma'am," she said, voice nervous, "I've never seen anyone handle something like that with so much control." Adrienne tilted her head. "You don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stand still and speak the truth." Jennings smiled and nodded, the kind of nod that said she'd remember that for a long time. Adrienne didn't need confirmation. She already knew. This wasn't the end. It was the ripple, and ripples become waves. It had been a month since the verdict, and for most people, the case was already fading into the background. News cycles moved fast, headlines got buried, and in the absence of scandal or outrage, the world kept turning. But for Adrienne, the silence wasn't peace. It was pressure, the kind you couldn't see but always felt, the kind that built slowly before something broke. She was back in her office at Fort Wayne, flipping through mission reports when Lieutenant Maddox entered with a knock on the door. "Ma'am," he said, clearing his throat. "You've got a visitor." Adrienne didn't look up. "Is it scheduled?" "No, ma'am, but he's from the Department of Justice." That got her attention. She stood up, adjusted the hem of her jacket, and walked out into the corridor. At the far end stood a man in a dark blue suit. Neat, conservative, the kind of guy who looked like he read legal briefs for breakfast. He extended a hand as she approached. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, I'm Special Agent Carter, DOJ Civil Rights Division." Adrienne shook his hand firmly. "You're a long way from D.C." He smiled. "Some things are better handled face to face." They sat in her office, the blinds drawn halfway. Carter pulled out a folder, thick with printed reports and transcripts. "We've been reviewing your case," he said. "Not just the trial, but what it uncovered." Adrienne leaned back in her chair, arms folded. "You found something." He nodded. "A pattern. Your case isn't isolated. In the last 2 years, there have been multiple complaints against Officer Mercer. Excessive force, improper stops. Most were quietly settled or dismissed. Yours is the only one that made it to court." Adrienne felt her jaw tighten. Why wasn't this brought up during discovery? Records were sealed. Internal Affairs has a habit of protecting its own. Carter let that sit for a second before continuing. "Now that the civil suit is over, we're opening a federal inquiry, not just into Mercer, but into the department's oversight." Adrienne didn't smile, she didn't gloat, she just nodded. "Good," she said. But Carter wasn't done. "Off the record," he added. "The way you handled this? Here's got people talking in all the right places. Quiet strength, command presence. You showed what accountability can look like, without screaming for it." Adrienne didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, past the buildings. and the training grounds where young soldiers ran drills in the dirt. Then she turned back to him. "Are you asking for something, Agent Carter?" He paused, measured. "We're assembling a panel," he said. "DOJ, military reps, civil rights. Advocates, focused on reform recommendations. I'd like your voice in that room," Adrienne exhaled slowly. She had enough on her plate. Logistics meetings, command briefings, her unit prepping for a summer rotation. But she also knew what silence cost. "I'll consider it," she said. "Send me the details." Carter nodded, stood, and shook her hand again. After he left, Adrienne sat alone for a moment, let the weight of the conversation settle. The case had cracked open something bigger than her personal experience. It wasn't just about what had happened that night. It was about all the nights that never made it to court. Later that evening, she ran a standard readiness inspection on her unit. Same protocol, same checklist, but something was different. The air felt sharper, more focused. Her soldiers snapped to attention a little quicker. Respect wasn't automatic, but it had deepened. After the inspection, Master Sergeant Cole caught up with her by the armory. "You thinking of joining that panel?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm thinking about it," she replied. Cole nodded. "Might be good to have someone in the room who's lived it, not just read about it in a file." Adrienne smirked. "I don't do politics." Cole chuckled. "That's exactly why they need you." The next morning, Adrienne found the email from Carter waiting in her inbox. Subject line, Federal Oversight Panel, proposal attached. She clicked it open, read the outline, and then hit reply. 2 sentences. Short, direct. "I'm in. Let me know when and where." She hit send, then closed the laptop. She wasn't trying to change the world. But if the world was knocking on her door, she wasn't going to hide behind it either. As she stepped outside into the cool morning air, a Black Hawk thundered overhead on final approach, the kind of reminder she liked best. Duty never ends. But sometimes it evolves. The Federal Oversight Panel wasn't what Adrienne expected. There were no grand speeches, no patriotic banners draped across the walls. Just a long rectangular table, stiff chairs, and 12 people who had never worked a day in uniform trying to fix what they barely understood. The room smelled like stale coffee and paperwork. Adrienne walked in, wearing her duty uniform, crisp and pressed, her nameplate catching the light. She nodded to the other panelists, most of whom looked up, then down, as if unsure how to greet her. Carter was already seated, flanked by 2 DOJ attorneys. He gave her a small nod. She took her seat. To her left was Dr. Nina Bell, a civil rights attorney from Chicago. To her right, a retired police chief from Cincinnati who had spent more time on cable news than on patrol. Across the table, think tank, analysts, academics, even a tech consultant from Silicon Valley pitching ideas about body cam AI filters. Adrienne kept quiet, observing, listening. After 2 hours of strategic visioning, she finally leaned forward, her voice cutting through the fog of theoretical jargon. Respectfully, she said, "You can't fix a broken system with white papers and pilot programs." The room turned toward her. "You need accountability," she continued, "real consequences, and real training, not just a PowerPoint on bias, but leadership training that teaches restraint under pressure." The room was quiet now, the kind of quiet where no one wanted to be the first to push back. The retired chief cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, I understand your experience was difficult." "It wasn't difficult," she cut in calmly. "It was unlawful, and I'm not here to rehash it. I'm here because what happened to me is happening to others, without the uniform to protect them." Dr. Bell leaned in. "Then let's talk solutions." For the next hour, Adrienne outlined a program, one based not just on punishment but on cultural shift, mandatory field rotations for internal affairs officers, civilian oversight with teeth, a joint review board with both military and police reps. "No one group owns integrity," she said. "But we all lose when it's missing." The mood shifted. The politeness gave way to something more serious. People started taking real notes, asking better questions. This wasn't a box-ticking session anymore. After the meeting, Carter walked with her down to the street. You just rewrote half the agenda, he said with a grin. I didn't come here to nod and smile, he chuckled. No, you didn't, and it's why they're actually listening. Adrienne looked out at the traffic, her hands tucked behind her back. I didn't think I'd be doing this a year ago, she admitted. What did you think you'd be doing? Leading, training, preparing the next generation. Carter looked at her. You still are. Later that night, back at Fort Wayne, Adrienne stepped into the gym, her sanctuary. She threw on gloves and started working the bag. Not out of rage, but to focus. Every strike was precise, controlled, disciplined through motion. Cole walked by, paused, and leaned on the doorway. Long day? Adrienne didn't stop punching. Long life, he smirked. Word is, you're shaking things up in that fancy panel. Adrienne dropped her gloves and looked over. They need a reality check. I'm just giving it to them. Cole nodded. Yeah, but just remember, when you shake a system, it pushes back. I'm not afraid of pushback, she said, wiping sweat from her brow. I've been through worse. You have, but not everyone around you has. She knew what he meant. The spotlight that was starting to follow her wasn't just hers to carry. It would touch everyone she led, everyone who stood beside her. Still, she didn't regret stepping into that courtroom, or that panel room. There were too many people who couldn't speak. She could, and she would. As the night wore on, she walked the halls of the base in silence, past training rooms, past empty offices, past framed photos of those who had served with honor. Her boots echoed on the polished floor. This was her home, her battlefield, and now her platform. The fight had changed, but the mission hadn't. Hold the line, and never back down. The morning headlines hit hard. Army officer wins civil suit against Toledo PD. Colonel Wallace speaks truth to power. Badge versus rank. The trial that shocked the system. Adrienne sipped her black coffee at the kitchen counter of her base quarters, flipping through her phone as the notifications kept piling up. Her inbox was flooded. Requests for interviews, panel invitations, even a message from a talk show producer who promised a platform to inspire. She ignored them all. She wasn't interested in being a media symbol. She hadn't fought this battle for a viral moment, but she also knew the moment had gone beyond her control. The case was out there now, on timelines, in group chats debated by talking heads, and not all the commentary was kind. She opened one message from an anonymous sender. Stay in your lane, Colonel. You're going to ruin careers. Another. So, now soldiers get to decide who's right on the street. She deleted them without flinching. But it wasn't lost on her. Visibility came with a price. At the base, the energy had shifted. People still saluted, still called her ma'am, but there was a new weight behind it. Some looked at her with admiration, others with unease, like she'd become a political figure instead of a commander. During a morning briefing, Sergeant Lang hesitated before presenting updates on vehicle readiness. His usual confidence was gone. Something wrong, Lang? She asked. He cleared his throat. No, ma'am, just trying to make sure I don't say the wrong thing. Adrienne raised an eyebrow. You're not on trial, Sergeant. Speak freely. He gave a tight nod and continued, but she could feel it. The air was different. Not hostile, just careful. After the meeting, she called him aside. Look, I get it, she said. Everything's loud right now, but inside this team we stay focused. We don't flinch, understood? Yes, ma'am. That night she got a call from her mother. I saw the news. Her voice came soft, southern and proud. Adrienne smiled, leaning against the wall. Yeah, it's been loud. I know you don't like the attention, but I want you to know I watched that footage, and I've never been prouder. Adrienne didn't say anything at first. She just closed her eyes and let the words settle. Sometimes the quiet affirmations meant more than anything in a courtroom. Later, walking the base perimeter with her dog tags tucked into her shirt, Adrienne saw a group of young soldiers outside. The barracks. They quieted as she passed. She stopped. You all got something to say? She asked, voice level. One of the newer privates stepped forward, nervous but firm. Permission to ask a question, ma'am? Go ahead. Do you think what you did actually changed anything? She looked at him for a long moment, then said, Ask me again in 5 years. He nodded, unsure if that was an answer or not. But she could tell. It mattered that he asked. It mattered that he was thinking. That night, in her quarters, she finally opened one of the interview requests. Not from a big network, just a podcast. Run by a former soldier turned advocate. The subject line said, "We don't want a soundbite, we want the truth." She didn't respond. Not yet. But she left the email unread, which was more than she'd done for the others. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the row of medals in the shadow of her bookshelf. The fight wasn't over. The noise wasn't going away, and now her silence would speak louder than ever. But Adrienne wasn't here for applause. She was here to keep the pressure on, to lead, to endure, and to make damn sure that next time someone like her was pulled over, they wouldn't have to be. A colonel to be treated with respect. 2 weeks after the verdict, the Toledo Police Department launched an internal review. They didn't announce it with fanfare. There were no press conferences, no apologies. Just a brief, vague press release. In light of recent legal proceedings, an internal review has been initiated regarding department protocols and conduct. But behind the scenes, the gears had started to grind. Officer Daniel Mercer was called in the next morning. Not to a courtroom this time, but to a narrow, fluorescent-lit office on the second floor of the precinct, where 2 internal affairs investigators waited with stiff expressions and thicker files. He sat down, hands folded tightly. "Sergeant." "Mercer," one of them began, "we're not here to retry your case. We're here to determine whether your conduct remains consistent with departmental standards." He nodded, but didn't speak. "You are being placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. This is non-punitive. However, your body cam footage, field reports, and history of civilian complaints are under review." That got his attention. "Complaints?" he asked. "Yes," the second investigator replied. "Several, in fact. Most were closed without escalation. But given recent developments, we are reopening them." Mercer's jaw tensed. "So because I pulled over a soldier, everything I've done gets questioned?" "No, Sergeant," the first investigator said evenly. "Because your conduct under pressure is now a matter of public record, and the public has questions." Mercer left the building with his badge still in his wallet, but the weight of it felt different now. Not like authority, like liability. Across town, Adrienne was meeting with Colonel Jeffrey Miles, her commanding officer at Fort Wayne. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You understand the kind of visibility this brings us, Wallace?" Adrienne nodded. "Yes, sir. You also understand some folks are going to treat you like a hero and others like a troublemaker." "I didn't file that case to be either." Miles studied her. "You did what you thought was right, that matters, but I need to know, are you ready for the fallout?" "I've been through worse than headlines." He leaned back in his chair. "Good, because we've got a new assignment. The Civil-Military Partnership Program is ramping up. Joint trainings with local law enforcement. You're my recommendation to lead the task force." Adrienne raised an eyebrow. "After everything?" "Especially after everything," he said. "This country needs someone who knows what accountability." "Looks like you in?" She didn't hesitate. "I'm in." Back at the Toledo precinct, murmurs spread. Some officers supported Mercer. "He was just doing his job," one of them muttered in the locker room. Others weren't so sure. "You see the footage," another said. "Didn't look like protocol to me. Looked personal." Mercer kept his head down, but the whispers followed. "Him everywhere." When he stopped by a gas station that afternoon, the clerk looked up and said, "Aren't you the cop from the news?" Mercer didn't respond. He just walked out. At Fort Wayne, Adrienne began assembling her task force. Military police, logistics officers, legal advisors, and yes, liaisons from the Toledo Police Department. She didn't request Mercer. She didn't need to. She was building something forward-looking, focused on transparency, communication, mutual respect, the things that had failed that night on the roadside. Lieutenant Carla Devereaux, a sharp-minded MP with a background in conflict resolution, approached Adrienne after the first planning meeting. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" "Always. I know we're here to build bridges," Devereaux said, "but some of those bridges are over broken ground." Adrienne nodded. "That's why we lay the foundation first. No shortcuts." The next morning, Adrienne received an anonymous envelope. In her office mailbox, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "You made your point, don't push it." She held it for a moment, then fed it into the shredder without a word. That evening, she stood outside the base, watching the sunset burn low across the Indiana sky. The world was changing, slowly, painfully. But it was changing, and she would be right there in the thick of it, not backing down, not fading out, because she didn't come this far to be quiet now. It was 5:17 a.m. when Adrienne Wallace's alarm buzzed. Not that she needed it. She was already awake, seated at the edge of her bed in her PT gear, lacing up her boots with the precision of muscle memory. Outside, Fort Wayne was still dark, the air crisp with early spring. Somewhere in the distance, a flag flapped gently. This was her sanctuary, her battlefield, her home. But that morning something felt different. There wasn't a specific reason. No headline, no briefing, just a tension in the air, like the pause before a storm. She knew that feeling. It had visited her in Afghanistan, in Syria, in every mission where chaos waited behind the calm. In the mess hall, soldiers moved quietly through breakfast, trays clinking, low chatter buzzing like static. A few nodded at Adrienne as she passed. Most didn't make eye contact, not out of disrespect, but because of everything she now symbolized. To them, she wasn't just Lieutenant Colonel Wallace anymore. She was the one who sued a cop and won. It had become a whisper in the ranks, both admired and controversial, and Adrienne, always direct, chose not to address it unless it interfered with the mission. After breakfast, she met with her civil-military partnership team. Today's agenda: outline the first joint training module, defensive tactics, use of force protocols, de-escalation strategies. It was meant to bridge the gap between civilian police and military procedures. As she walked the team through the plan, she kept her voice steady and her tone firm. Clear, precise. She wasn't here to lecture. She was here to lead. Lieutenant. Carla Devereaux leaned in as the meeting wrapped up. "Ma'am, you sure we're ready to bring in TPD officers next week?" Adrienne nodded. "They'll come. They need this. So do we." "But what if Mercer shows?" Adrienne met her eyes. "Then he sees how it's supposed to be done." That night, she stayed late in her office reviewing joint training records. Names, histories, service notes. Her fingers paused on one document, an officer from TPD scheduled for observation, Sergeant Daniel Mercer. There was no note, no asterisk. Just the name, clean, sanitized. She sat back in her chair staring at the line. Part of her had expected it. A test, maybe, a power move, or just bureaucracy being blind to tension. Either way, she wasn't surprised. She clicked her pen and made a note in the margin: proceed as planned. Across town, Mercer sat in his apartment, the glow of the television flickering against his face. He wasn't watching it, just letting it talk so he didn't have to. The call from the precinct had come earlier. "You're being rotated into the Fort Wayne Task Force, observation and retraining phase." He hadn't responded right away, just stared at the wall like it might have an escape route etched into the paint. He wasn't dumb. He knew what this was. Not punishment, not exactly, but a leash. A performance review in uniform. They wanted to see if he could play nice. Part of him wanted to refuse, to quit, to walk away and call the whole thing a setup. But another part of him knew if he left now, he'd be proving every word of that courtroom testimony right. So he said yes. And now here he was, watching shadows on the wall and pretending they didn't look like consequences. The next morning, Adrienne ran 5 miles before dawn. The air cut sharp across her skin, but she welcomed the burn. It was real, grounding. By the time she returned, the base was coming alive. Footsteps, radios, vehicles humming. She showered, changed into her fatigues, and made her way to the task. Force office. A civilian liaison from TPD was already waiting in the conference room, along with 2 officers she didn't recognize, and one she did. Mercer. He stood when she walked in. Not out of respect, more like reflex. "Sergeant," she said coolly. "Lieutenant Colonel," he replied. She looked him in the eye, not with anger, but clarity. "This is a professional environment," she said, "and you will be treated as such, as long as you act accordingly." Mercer nodded once. Understood. Adrienne turned to the room. We are not here to rehash the past. We're here to redefine the future. If that makes anyone uncomfortable, good. Growth usually does. A few officers exchanged glances. No one spoke. She opened the briefing file. Today we train. Tomorrow we build. Let's get to work. The room shifted into action. Quiet, uncertain but moving, and outside the sun began to rise over Fort Wayne, brilliant and unbothered, like it had no idea what weight the day might carry. But Adrienne knew, because sometimes the quiet before isn't peace, it's preparation. By 1300 hours, the joint training exercise was in full swing. The drill yard behind Fort Wayne's primary operations building had been converted into a makeshift street scene, complete with cones, barriers, fake storefronts, and role players. Adrienne stood at the edge, clipboard in hand, monitoring the mixed group of soldiers and police officers going through a de-escalation scenario. She watched as a young private from her unit and a TPD officer approached a civilian actor simulating an aggressive mental health crisis. The private hesitated, too long. The officer barked a command. The civilian screamed and bolted. Exercise failed. Adrienne blew her whistle once. Sharp, commanding, reset. They went again. She wasn't angry, not yet. This was why they trained, but she could feel the tension brewing. The way some officers bristled at being corrected by military personnel. The way some soldiers didn't want to be seen working side by side with law enforcement, especially after the case. It lingered in every sideways glance. Every whispered, "That's her." Adrienne didn't flinch. Mercer was in the second wave. Observing, taking notes, quiet. She watched him closely, not with spite, but with intent. He wasn't making waves, not drawing attention, but he also wasn't blending in. His movements were stiff, his attention fractured. She noticed how his eyes lingered too long on her. During a break, Adrienne approached him. "You're not just here to stand around." Mercer looked up from his notepad. "I'm observing protocol, ma'am. Protocol doesn't teach awareness, that comes from presence." He clenched his jaw slightly but nodded. "I'm here to learn," he said, but there was something hollow in the delivery. Adrienne narrowed her eyes, then dropped the attitude and started watching like someone who gives a damn. He didn't respond. Just walked back to the staging area. An hour later they ran another drill, this time a traffic stop scenario. 2 vehicles, 1 officer, 1 driver. Neutral situation turned volatile if the approach was mishandled. Adrienne watched the pair set up, Private Lewis and Officer Ramirez. Everything started smooth, friendly tone, open posture. Then Ramirez raised her voice too quickly, misreading Lewis's body language. Escalation. Adrienne held up a hand. Pause. The actors froze mid-motion. She stepped in. "What just happened?" Ramirez spoke defensively. "He reached into the glove box too fast." Adrienne nodded. "And how did you respond?" "With authority." "You responded with volume," Adrienne said. "There's a difference. What's the goal of this exercise?" "Control," Ramirez said. Adrienne shook her head. "No, resolution. Control is about you. Resolution is about the situation." The training yard went quiet. Mercer stood to the side, arms crossed, watching her intently. That night, Adrienne stayed in the strategy room late, reviewing footage from the day's sessions. Her eyes were tired, but her focus never wavered. Colonel Danvers stopped by. "You're pushing them hard. They need it." He folded his arms. "That include Mercer." Adrienne looked up. "He's not special. He gets what everyone gets, the standard." Danvers gave her a half smile. "You know, there's talk, rumors about why you're doing this." "I'm aware." "And?" Adrienne leaned back in her chair. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for reform." Danvers paused. "That's a hell of a hill to climb." Adrienne stared at the screen in front of her. "Good thing I'm used to elevation." 2 floors below, in the officer's lounge, Mercer sat alone, his tablet open but untouched. He was watching a clip on repeat, body cam footage. Not from the training, from that night, the stop. The moment she turned on her phone, the moment everything shifted. He wasn't sure why he watched it now. Maybe guilt, maybe defiance, maybe something between the two, but this time he noticed something. Her calm, not just composure, not just military discipline, conviction. She hadn't tried to win the moment. She'd played for the long game, and she had won. Not just the case, but the room, the silence, the eyes, the truth. He closed the tablet and rubbed his face, then looked out the window at the dark base. The cracks in his armor were growing. And the pressure was only building. Back in her quarters, Adrienne knelt beside her bed, not to pray, but to breathe, to steady, to prepare. Tomorrow, they'd begin the live response drills, and that's where the real pressure points would be. Tested, not just in tactics, but in character. The air felt heavier that morning, not from weather, but expectation. Live response drills weren't theoretical. They were fast, real, and recorded. No do-overs. Everyone knew it. Adrienne stood at the command tower overlooking the training compound. Below her, the scene was already set. Abandoned cars, mock suspects, and a bank of hidden cameras tracking every movement. Today, it wasn't about pretend stress. It was about showing how people acted under pressure. Danvers stood beside her, arms folded. "We greenlit this because we trust your judgment, Wallace. Don't make me regret it." "You won't," she replied simply. Down in the staging area, Mercer adjusted his duty belt. He was paired with Private Jenkins, a 20-year-old fresh from basic, young, eager, and jittery as hell. "Relax," Mercer muttered. "Just follow my lead." Jenkins nodded too quickly. The scenario began. They were dispatched to a simulated domestic disturbance. A man yelling in a backyard reports of a weapon. As they approached, Jenkins moved wide like he'd been taught. Mercer approached straight on, hand near his sidearm. The actor shouted, waving a prop pipe. "Drop the weapon," Mercer barked. The actor didn't move. Mercer edged closer. "Drop it. Now." Jenkins's voice cracked. "Sir, we're just here to talk." "Don't talk," Mercer snapped. Eyes locked on the suspect, Adrienne was watching from above. She leaned into the radio. "Hold, reset." The simulation froze. Adrienne's voice came across the loudspeakers. "Sergeant Mercer, return to the tower." When he reached her, Mercer's face was red. That was by the book. Adrienne raised an eyebrow. "No, that was a lecture in escalation." He had a weapon, a pipe, not a gun, not swung. "Your partner attempted dialogue. You shut it down. Why?" "Because that's how you stay alive." Adrienne didn't blink. "And sometimes that's how you make enemies instead of allies." That suspect wasn't charging, he was yelling. "And you didn't ask one question, you issued commands." Mercer looked away, jaw tight. "You wouldn't understand." Adrienne stepped closer, her voice steady. "I've had men point rifles at me in Kabul and not flinch. I understand more than you think." For a beat he looked like he might argue, but he didn't. He just left. Later that day, Adrienne pulled Jenkins aside. "You did good. Kept your voice level. Tried to de-escalate." Jenkins looked confused. "Even though I didn't follow his lead?" Adrienne nodded. "Sometimes leadership is knowing when not to follow." At lunch, the officers and soldiers gathered in the mess hall. Lines blurred more now. People sat together, eating, talking, arguing even, but engaging. Officer Ramirez approached Adrienne. "I've been thinking about what you said, about resolution versus control. It's hard to shift that mindset." "It is," Adrienne agreed, "especially when the system trains you to think everything is a threat." Ramirez nodded slowly. "I joined the force to help people. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. Then start remembering," Adrienne said, "one call at a time." That night, after lights out, Adrienne stood on the catwalk overlooking the quiet base. Stars above, silence below. Danvers joined her. "You're stirring the pot," he said. "I'm not afraid of turbulence." He chuckled. "No, you're not. You think Mercer's learning anything?" Adrienne exhaled. "That depends on whether he sees this as punishment or a second chance." "Do you?" "I see it as necessary," she said. "Not for him, for everyone else watching." Danvers nodded. We've got a long road ahead." Adrienne looked out over Fort Wayne. Good thing I don't scare easy. The sun hadn't fully risen when Adrienne stepped into the base's small chapel. Not to pray, but to think. The wood benches were empty, the stained glass window throwing amber streaks across the floor. Peaceful. For a moment it felt like the only quiet place in a world full of noise. She needed that silence. Everything outside the chapel walls was movement and tension. Word was spreading, not just across Fort Wayne, but into nearby precincts. What had started as a training initiative was now a conversation. Some called it bold, others called it trouble. Mercer called it something else entirely. Later that morning he requested a meeting. When he walked into her office he was stiff. Not defiant, but guarded, like someone preparing to be hit. Adrienne gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit." He did, slowly. "I didn't come to fight." "Good," she said, "because I'm not here to argue." A pause. "I've been thinking," Mercer started, eyes low. "About the trial. About how I handled things. About everything." Adrienne leaned back. She didn't speak. She let him sit in it. "I keep replaying it," he continued. "That night you weren't aggressive. You weren't disrespectful, but I saw you as a problem anyway." "Why?" she asked. Mercer looked up at her. His voice didn't shake, but it dropped. "Because you didn't act afraid." There it was. Adrienne didn't flinch. "Fear and respect aren't the same thing, Sergeant." He nodded, slow and shamefaced. "I think I confused the two. For a long time." "You're not the only one," she replied. A beat of silence passed before he said, "I don't know if I deserve this chance. To still be here, still be wearing the badge." Adrienne's voice softened just slightly. "Then prove you do, not to me, to them, to the ones watching you, learning from you." Mercer stood, but not quickly, not with the cocky swagger he used to carry. Just a man moving slower, heavier. "I'll try." She nodded once. "That's the first thing you've said today that sounded like a leader." That afternoon, Danvers met her outside the barracks. "You talked to him," he said, not asking. "I did. Should we expect a resignation letter?" "No," Adrienne said. "We should expect him to show us who he really is." Danvers looked surprised. "You still think he can change?" "I think accountability plants a seed. Whether it grows is up to him." As they walked toward the parade field, Adrienne spotted Jenkins and Ramirez practicing a field scenario. Ramirez gave advice. Jenkins nodded and adjusted. A few months ago, those two wouldn't have even spoken. Change was slow, but it was happening. That night, Adrienne sat alone at her desk, reviewing footage from the latest drills. She took notes, flagged moments, rewound. Over and over, not to catch mistakes, but to track progress. Behind her, pinned on the wall, was a copy of the court decision, not for ego, not for show, but as a reminder of why she stayed in the fight. Not for revenge, not for power, but for change. And change, she knew, didn't come from shouting. It came from showing up, from staying steady, from proving day after day that leadership was about who you lifted, not who you stepped over. She clicked off the footage. Shut down the laptop. Tomorrow the work would start again, and she'd be ready. 2 weeks after the verdict, things at Fort Wayne looked the same on the surface. Morning drills, gear inspections, strategy briefings. But underneath, a subtle shift had begun. Conversations lingered longer. Recruits asked tougher questions, and officers who used to lead by fear were now watching their tone. Adrienne noticed it, but she didn't comment. She didn't have to. Culture change wasn't about making announcements. It was about consistency. Quiet, steady, deliberate consistency. One afternoon, after a full-day field simulation, she gathered a group of junior officers for a leadership debrief. Most of them were exhausted, mud on their boots, sweat soaking their collars, but alert. This wasn't the kind of meeting they wanted to sleep through. "I'm not here to talk about your scores," she started. "I'm here to talk about what happens when you think no one's watching." Some exchanged looks. One of them, a sharp but overly confident lieutenant named Parker, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with respect, the cameras are always on. Everyone's watching now." "That's not what I mean," Adrienne said. I'm talking about those moments when it's just you and a decision. No ranking officer, no rulebook in your hand, just instinct. That's where leadership lives, or dies. The room quieted. She let it sink in. Respect, she continued, isn't a title, it's a choice, yours. And how you treat people, especially the ones who can't do anything for you, tells me everything I need to know. Parker nodded. Slower this time, less cocky. Dismissed, she said. As the room cleared, Danvers lingered behind. Hell of a speech, he said. You're getting good at those. I'm not trying to give speeches, she replied. I'm trying to build something that lasts after I'm gone. Danvers leaned on the doorframe. Think you'll stay after your current term? Adrienne didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window at the recruits jogging across the field, laughing, yelling, wiping sweat from their faces. I don't know, she said. I think the fight's bigger than this base. That evening, she received an unexpected email. Subject line, DOJ review request, Civil Rights Division. She opened it and scanned the body. The Department of Justice was launching an internal inquiry into the Toledo Police Department's field stop procedures. Adrienne's case was listed as a key catalyst. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. She didn't feel pride, not exactly. It was something else. A ripple. Small, but real. Later that week, she drove into town in civilian clothes. Jeans, boots, a plain button-up. No badges, no stripes, just her. At the coffee shop near City Hall, a young black woman in scrubs approached her cautiously. Excuse me, the woman said. Are you Colonel Wallace? Adrienne turned. Yes, I watched your case. I saw you on the news, what you did. She swallowed. It mattered, Adrienne offered a soft smile. Thank you. I just wanted to say, I had something happen a few years back. I didn't fight it. I didn't think anyone would listen. Adrienne met her eyes. They might not have back then, but maybe they will now. The woman nodded, blinking fast. I hope so. After she left, Adrienne sat with her coffee, staring out the window. Change wasn't linear. It wasn't clean, but it was possible. You just had to stay in the fight long enough to see it. Back at Fort Wayne, Adrienne's schedule resumed its relentless pace. Logistics meetings, coordination calls, and prepping a new battalion rotation. But even as she juggled the endless stream of responsibilities, there was a different kind of attention surrounding her now. Not loud or invasive, just watchful. Commanders from other bases started reaching out, not with formal inquiries, but with quiet conversations. How'd you handle the pressure? What would you have done if the verdict went the other way? Did you ever doubt yourself? Adrienne never gave rehearsed answers. She didn't have any. She just told the truth. You prepare and you lead. That's all you can control. But not everyone was supportive. Some voices, older, sharper, whispered about her behind closed doors. She made it political. She brought too much attention. She should have stayed quiet. She'd heard those kinds of things before. When she was the only woman in the convoy, when she was promoted faster than men with more time in service, when she spoke up in meetings where others chose silence, that was the thing about leadership. It didn't always come with applause. Late one evening, Adrienne sat alone in her office, reviewing deployment reports. Her desk lamp cast a sharp cone of light, leaving the rest of the room in shadows. There was a knock at her door. Come in, she called. It was Staff Sergeant Fields, a woman in her 30s, decorated but soft-spoken, who rarely sought Adrienne out. Can I talk to you off record? Adrienne closed her laptop. Of course. Fields hesitated before sitting down. It's about something that happened to one of my soldiers. Off base. Minor incident, but it didn't feel right. He's scared to report it. Adrienne's voice stayed calm. Why? He thinks he'll be labeled a problem, that it'll follow him. Adrienne nodded. She knew that feeling well. And what do you think? I think if we don't protect our people when it matters most, we don't deserve the positions we hold. Adrienne leaned forward, her tone firm but reassuring. Then we do it right. Chain of command, documentation, and transparency. No cover-ups, no quiet dismissals. Fields exhaled, the tension in her shoulders softening. Thank you, Ma'am. After Fields left, Adrienne sat back in her chair. She thought of Mercer, of the courtroom, of the countless times silence had been the default because it was easier, or safer, or more convenient. But silence was a weight. It crushed the ones who carried it too long. The next morning, Adrienne walked into the briefing room and found her team waiting. She didn't smile or offer small talk. She stood in front of them and said, "Listen up. From here on out, I don't want to hear about letting things slide or keeping the peace when something's wrong. You see something, you speak. You hear something, you report. If your gut says it's wrong, it probably is. You'll be protected, but you better speak up." Some nodded immediately. Others hesitated. But the room was listening. Really listening. That afternoon she received another call, this time from a colonel out of Virginia. "We've got a cadet who filed a complaint against a local officer. Case was dismissed before it ever reached a judge." Adrienne paused. "What do you want from me?" "I want to know how to do what you did, without burning down my own house." Adrienne gave a small laugh. "You don't burn it down. You show people where the foundation's cracked. Then you make them fix it." He was quiet for a beat. "You ever regret it?" Adrienne's answer was immediate. "No." She hung up and looked out her office window. The sun was setting over the training yard, casting long shadows across the parade grounds. A new cycle of recruits had just arrived. Their voices echoed through the open space, high-pitched and full of nervous excitement. This was where the future started. Not in headlines, not in courtrooms, but in rooms like this, on bases like hers, with people still deciding what kind of leaders they wanted to become. And Adrienne Wallace, flawed, tested, relentless, was going to make damn sure they had a better blueprint than the one she was handed. The fallout from the trial didn't hit all at once. It came in waves, an article here, a segment there. Small news sites picked it up first, then a few regional outlets, each adding their own spin. Lieutenant Colonel sues local cop. Decorated officer wins civil rights case. Police. Stop gone wrong sparks national debate. Adrienne ignored most of it. She hadn't done any interviews. Delaney had fielded a few inquiries, but Adrienne made it clear this wasn't about fame or clicks. Still, the attention grew. Then, one day, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She debated letting it go. But instinct told her to answer. "Lieutenant." "Colonel Wallace?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Mia Hall from the Frontline Project. We're an investigative outlet focused on systemic accountability in law enforcement and the military. I've been following your case." Adrienne said nothing at first. "We're not looking for drama," Mia added. "We want the truth, unfiltered." Adrienne finally spoke. "Truth doesn't usually trend. That's why it matters." Adrienne didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. That night, she read up on the Frontline Project. It wasn't cable news or tabloid style. It was sharp, well-researched. They had taken down a corrupt sheriff's department in Louisiana, a wrongful conviction in Kentucky, quiet work with big impact. Maybe it was time to talk. A week later, Adrienne met Mia in a quiet cafe just outside base. No cameras, just notebooks and coffee. Mia didn't waste time. "Why did you go to court instead of handling it internally?" Adrienne looked her in the eye. "Because internally, things disappear." "And what were you hoping to accomplish?" "Accountability. Not just for Mercer, but for the system that allowed him to act like that without blinking." Mia nodded. "Do you think it worked?" Adrienne thought about that. "Ask me in 5 years." The article went live 2 weeks later. The headline read, "The Colonel Who Didn't Flinch." It didn't go viral, it didn't crash websites, but it landed. Emails began to come in from soldiers, civilians, officers, even a few people Adrienne hadn't spoken to in years. Some were supportive. "Thank you for saying what we're too afraid to say." Others were angry. "You've turned your back on the badge." She let the noise pass. She knew the difference between backlash and consequence. One email, though, stood out. It was from someone named Christina Westbrook. Subject, "I know that look." It Red Mom, I watched the court footage. I saw his face. That look, the one where they stop seeing you as a person, I've seen it too. I was 19, stopped on my way to a night shift. I did everything right. Still got pulled out, humiliated, searched, no record, no apology. Just shame I never fought back. But seeing you up there, it made me wish I had. Thank you for standing up. For all of us who didn't know how. Adrienne. Read it twice, then once more, that was it. That was why it had all been worth it, not the verdict, not the money, not the headlines, but the ripple. A few days later, Adrienne got a call from Fort Wayne's base commander, got a request from the Department of Defense. They want someone to sit in on a joint panel about civilian interactions. You're on the shortlist. Adrienne blinked. That's unexpected. You made waves, he said simply. Now they want to see if you can steer the current. She didn't answer right away. Then, if I go, I won't sugarcoat anything. I know, he said. That's why they're asking. Adrienne sat alone in her quarters that night, watching the clock tick past midnight. She thought about Mercer, about the badge, the smirk, the courtroom. She thought about Christina Westbrook and the hundreds of others like her. She thought about every time she had been told to sit down, keep quiet, stay in line, and every time she hadn't. She picked up her phone and sent a message to Delaney. Let's talk panel strategy. Looks like I'm not done yet. Washington, D.C. was a different kind of battlefield. There were no boots in the mud, no rifles or convoys, just suits, titles, long hallways, and glass-walled rooms where words weighed more than bullets. Adrienne had been in war zones. She'd negotiated hostage releases, survived ambushes, and led missions under fire. But walking into the Pentagon for the first meeting of the Joint Civilian-Military Conduct Panel made her feel strangely exposed. She wore her service uniform, not for decoration, but to remind every person in the room exactly who she was and what she represented. There were 6 people on the panel. 2 generals, 1 police chief, a civil rights attorney, a congressional aide, and her. They all stood when she entered. Respect, formal and stiff. Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, the chair, a 3-star general, greeted her. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for inviting me, sir. They sat. The tone was polite but tense. Most of the group knew why. She was here, but no one wanted to bring it up first. So she did. I assume this panel wasn't formed because everything's working perfectly. That cracked the silence. The attorney smirked. The aide scribbled something down. The police chief shifted. The general nodded. We're here because the line between civilian authority and military presence is getting thinner. Your case made it thinner. No, Adrienne said plainly. It exposed that the line never existed in some places, just assumptions and fear. The chief spoke next. What would you have had the officer do differently that night? Adrienne looked him dead in the eye. Respect the badge enough? Not to disgrace it. The room went still. This isn't about hating law enforcement. I come from discipline, order, structure. But I also know that power without oversight is just sanctioned abuse. If we want public trust, we have to stop acting like it's automatic. The civil rights attorney nodded. Well said. They moved into specifics, training reforms, use of force protocols, recording policies. Adrienne offered her thoughts, without raising her voice, but every word landed like a hammer. That evening, after hours of meetings, she walked past a corridor lined with portraits of senior officials, men in crisp suits, stern expressions, leaders of eras past. She paused. In front of one. General Holloway, Vietnam, a legend, known both for battlefield brilliance and a brutal refusal to acknowledge civilian scrutiny. Adrienne stared at his photo. Different war, same arrogance. As she stood there, another figure joined her, the congressional. Haid, young mid-30s, sharp grey suit. You shook that room today, he said. I didn't come here to shake things. I came here to fix what's broken. He nodded. Fixing things is messy. I'm used to that. He paused. Off the record, do you think this will lead to real change? Adrienne's answer came without hesitation. It only will if we make sure it doesn't disappear when the headlines do. Back at Fort Wayne, the pace hadn't slowed. The recruits were still training. Missions still needed planning. She didn't tell them much about D.C., but word got around. They knew. And the respect she already had only deepened. In one training exercise, a young lieutenant approached her afterward. "Ma'am, do you mind if I ask, why didn't you just let it go? With the stop? With Mercer?" Adrienne looked at him, steady. "Because too many people already have. And someone always pays for that silence, usually the ones who can't afford to." The lieutenant nodded slowly. "Makes sense." Adrienne clapped a hand on his shoulder. "And don't forget, standing up isn't about drama. It's about discipline." She didn't want to be anyone's symbol. She hated that word. But if she had to be something, let it be this. Proof that justice wasn't only for the loud, the rich, or the powerful, but for the prepared, the principled, the ones who didn't blink. That weekend she received a package in the mail, no return address, just a small box and a note tucked inside. The note read, "You probably won't remember me, but I was in the back of that courtroom. I didn't know your name then. I do now. My daughter wants to go into the army. I used to be scared. I'm less scared now, thank you." Inside the box was a ribbon, civilian service commendation, homemade, laminated, slightly crooked. Adrienne held it for a long time. Then, without a word, she added it to the bottom drawer of her desk, beneath her medals, beneath her stripes. Not because it meant less, but because it meant more. The story had started to spread beyond Fort Wayne, beyond Toledo, even beyond the courtroom where the verdict had landed like a quiet thunderclap. Adrienne never asked for press, but stories like hers didn't stay buried, not when they touched something raw and real in people. One morning she walked past the base rec room and caught a glimpse of herself on TV. Her name mentioned in a segment about police reform and military leadership. She didn't stop to listen, just kept walking. She'd always known this wasn't just about one incident. The Mercer case had become a mirror, and people were seeing themselves in it. Some saw Adrienne as a hero, others as a problem, the ones who stayed silent. She understood them the best. Silence was safe. Silence didn't make you a target. But silence, Adrienne had learned, never changed anything. Meanwhile, Mercer's administrative leave had stretched into indefinite limbo. His department had issued a carefully worded statement. "The matter remains under internal review. No apology, no policy shift, just process." But not everyone on the inside wanted to protect him. A month after the verdict, Adrienne received an anonymous email. It came from a burner address, no signature, just one line. "Check the Toledo precincts. Training logs for Mercer's unit. Especially March to August." She didn't know if it was real, but she forwarded it to her attorney anyway. A week later, Delaney called her, voice tight with disbelief. Mercer failed 2 de-escalation assessments. The second one flagged him. "For retraining." "You want to guess whether that happened?" Adrienne closed her eyes. "Let me guess. They waived it. They buried it. Falsified the sign-off. His supervisor signed off on a session Mercer didn't even attend. And that supervisor? Retired last fall. Clean record. No follow-up." Adrienne didn't need to ask what came next. The Department of Justice would be notified. The press would dig deeper. The cracks would widen. But the real question was, who sent the tip? She might never know. Maybe it was an officer who'd seen too much. Maybe someone still inside, watching it all happen in real time, sick of being complicit. Either way, someone out there had decided enough was enough. That night, Adrienne stood alone in the Fort Wayne gym after hours, hitting the heavy bag in a slow, controlled rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Each strike wasn't about anger. It was about control, precision, discipline. The same things Mercer had lacked, the same things Adrienne refused to lose. Afterward, she sat on the bench and toweled off, eyes drifting to the wall where mottos and slogans were painted in bold block letters. One read, "Honor is doing what's right when no one is watching." Another, "Your uniform is earned, not granted." She stared at those words a long time, because that was the real issue. Not uniforms, not badges, not even training. It was about how people wore power, like a shield or like a mirror. A shield kept others out, protected you from consequence. A mirror forced you to see yourself, clearly, honestly, even when it hurt. Adrienne had seen too many shields. She was trying to build mirrors. The next day, she got a call from Captain Renee Eldridge, a veteran officer from Fort Wayne's police. Liaison team. They'd worked together during joint disaster drills and search and rescue simulations. Eldridge was blunt, no-nonsense, and respected on both sides of the line. "I want to set up a training," Eldridge said. "Military and civilian law enforcement, joint workshop. Your call sign is carrying weight these days. I want to use that. Momentum while it lasts." "What kind of training?" Adrienne asked. "Scenario-based, real-world simulations, body cam reviews, stress testing, rank-to-rank conversation. No fluff." Adrienne nodded slowly. "You'll have pushback." "Already do. But I've also got backing from higher up. People are watching. They just need someone to go first." Adrienne didn't hesitate. "Let's go first." By the end of the week, planning was underway. The workshop would be held in a neutral space, an old armory repurposed for community events. Officers and soldiers would train together, side by side, walking through each other's worlds. It wasn't a fix, it wasn't a cure. But it was a start. The kind of start that didn't make headlines. The kind that made habits. That weekend, Adrienne sat alone at a local diner, sipping black coffee and reviewing the draft curriculum. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, dropped off her check and said softly, "I saw what you did. I've got 2 sons, thank you." Adrienne didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Not every battle was fought with a rifle. Some were fought with truth, with patience, with the choice not to walk away when it would be easier. Outside, the sky was heavy with clouds. Rain was coming. But inside the diner, for just a moment, the world felt a little clearer. The joint workshop kicked off on a chilly Monday morning inside the repurposed armory. Rows of folding chairs lined the space, half filled with officers in navy blues, the other half with soldiers in olive drab and camo. The tension in the room wasn't open hostility, just wariness. 2 cultures trained differently, often judged differently, sharing a room with no clear script. Adrienne stood at the front next to Captain Renee Eldridge, both of them in uniform. But without rank fuss, no barking orders, no formal salutes. Just 2 leaders trying to bridge a very old divide. "Before we get into today's work," Eldridge said, "let's set the ground rules. No rank pulling, no defensive speeches, no finger pointing. This isn't about blame. It's about understanding. We don't need everyone to agree. We need everyone to listen." A few heads nodded. Some arms stayed crossed. Then it was Adrienne's turn. She stepped forward and scanned the room, meeting eyes, not challenging, just steady. Every person in this room raised their hand and swore to serve. But how we carry that promise depends on what we think service actually means, she said. For some, it's keeping peace. For others, it's preparing for war, and sometimes those lines blur. I know what it feels like to be feared for a uniform. I also know what it feels like to be ignored in one. Silence. She let it linger. This week isn't about theory. It's about moments, decisions, habits. You'll be in scenarios where you don't have time to think. You'll rely on instinct. And if those instincts are broken, if your training can't handle grey areas, someone innocent pays the price. She looked across the room. And maybe that someone is you. The words landed like a slow drop of cold water, uncomfortable, but impossible to ignore. The first exercise was simple, a simulated traffic stop with role reversals. Officers played civilians, soldiers played cops. Each side got a script, but halfway through, the instructors changed it without warning. Suddenly, the compliant civilian became nervous. The officer hesitated. The situation got complicated. Some handled it well, some didn't. One officer, a younger guy named Torres, raised his voice when his civilian, a female soldier, asked too many questions. "Just get out of the car," he snapped. The instructor paused the scenario and asked him why. Torres shrugged. She kept pushing back. It felt like she was hiding something. Adrienne raised an eyebrow. Was she breaking the law? No, but did she threaten? "You." "No." "So the escalation came from you." Torres looked down. "I guess it did." "And that's what this is for," Adrienne said. "Not to shame, to see. Because if you don't recognize the moment it starts to spiral, you can't stop it." By day 3, the tone had shifted. Conversations in the break room were less stiff. Cops and soldiers started sharing stories, real ones, mistakes they'd... Made. Situations they regretted. Encounters that stuck with them years later. One military sergeant admitted he froze the first time a teenager pointed a phone at him during a stop. I wasn't scared of the kid, I was scared of what the camera would catch if I messed up. That fear? It made me tense. I nearly said something I would have regretted. A patrol officer nodded slowly. That's the part they don't teach you in academy. How to stay human when someone's watching you like you're the villain. Adrienne just listened, because the walls were coming down, brick by brick, story by story. On the final day, they dimmed the lights and played back real footage from a range of stops, good ones and bad ones, de-escalations done right, moments that turned ugly without reason. And then they showed Adrienne's own video, the stop with Mercer, start to finish. The room was silent. Every person in that armory watched her on screen, calm, composed, asking reasonable questions. And they watched Mercer, agitated, condescending, treating her like a threat before he even understood who she was. When the clip ended, nobody spoke for a full 10 seconds. Then a voice from the back broke the silence. It was a grizzled sergeant. From Toledo, arms crossed, voice low. That could have been any of us, he said. And that's the damn problem. Adrienne turned to face him. Which part? The part where we forget who's in front of us. Another voice chimed in. This one younger military. The part where we forget who we are too. Eldridge stepped forward. We can't rewrite the past, but we can retrain the future. If we want things to change, it has to start with us. The way we carry the badge, the way we carry the rank. Someone in the front row clapped once. Then, another. Soon the room joined in, not a standing ovation, just a slow, honest rhythm, not for a speech but for a shift. That night, Adrienne stood outside the armory in the cold. Her hands were shoved into her jacket pockets. She wasn't thinking about Mercer. She wasn't even thinking about the verdict. She was thinking about mirrors, the kind you hold up to, others, and the kind that show you who you are when the uniform comes off. Captain Eldridge stepped out beside her. You think it made a difference? She asked. Adrienne looked up at the stars, then down at the empty parking lot. Yeah, she said, but only if we keep showing up. Sergeant Daniel Mercer sat across the conference table from 3 men in suits and a woman with a Department of Justice badge clipped to her blazer. The internal review was no longer just an administrative formality, it had escalated. What started as a PR issue had become a departmental reckoning. The room was plain, no windows, just a digital recorder on the table and a folder with his name, printed neatly on the cover. You understand this is not a criminal proceeding, said the lead investigator, an older man named Harris. But your responses will be used in evaluating your continued employment and potentially in broader DOJ oversight efforts. Mercer nodded. His voice was tight when he answered, Yes. The woman with the DOJ badge leaned forward. Sergeant Mercer, let's start with the night of January 17th. Were you familiar with the standard stop and search policy regarding federal vehicles? Yes. Then why did you ask Lieutenant Colonel Wallace to exit her car before confirming any threat? She wasn't cooperative. Define cooperative. Mercer hesitated. She asked too many questions. Delayed the stop, Harris interjected. Are questions a violation of protocol? No. Were you aware your body cam was recording? Yes. The woman narrowed her eyes. So knowing that everything was being documented, why escalate? Mercer sat still, hands folded tightly, his jaw clenched. The room held its breath. Finally, he muttered, Because I didn't think it would matter. It was the first honest thing he'd said all morning. Meanwhile, back at Fort Wayne, Adrienne sat with Command Sergeant Major Ellis, reviewing new updates to the base's engagement policy. The workshop had opened more doors than she expected. Military police wanted to revise their field training, and several local departments had requested follow-up sessions. You really stirred the pot, Ellis said, not unkindly. I didn't. Come to stir, Adrienne replied, flipping a page. I came to clean out what's been rotting underneath. Ellis gave a short laugh. You realize half the brass are still uncomfortable with what you did? I'm not here for their comfort, he nodded. And the other half? They're the ones calling me asking for the training manual. That afternoon, Adrienne got a call from Delaney Price. DOJ wants to move forward, Delaney said. Not with charges yet, but with a department-wide inquiry into systemic misconduct. They're using your case as a reference point. Adrienne took a breath. Good. There's more, Delaney added. They want you to speak, not just internally, publicly. A panel next month. Federal Oversight Conference, D.C. Adrienne sat still. You don't have to say yes, Delaney said gently. You've done more than enough. I'll do it, Adrienne said, but not for them, for the ones who still think silence is their only shield. That night, Mercer returned home to a quiet house. No lights on. The air felt stale, like it hadn't moved in days. His suspension had turned his world inside out. The badge that once gave him control now felt like a curse. His name had been whispered in every hallway, featured in too many side conversations. He pulled open his laptop and searched his own name. The articles were small, local news blurbs mostly, but they were everywhere. Toledo officer loses civil suit after unlawful stop. Army officer wins case, court rules. Violation of constitutional rights. Badge versus rank, a clash of culture and power. He slammed the laptop shut, but the echo lingered. Elsewhere, the city was already shifting. A new report from the Toledo Review Board was scheduled to release. Officers were now being rotated through additional training programs. The language around accountability was changing, from defensive to reflective. Adrienne didn't watch it unfold like a politician watching polls. She stayed in motion, teaching, mentoring, enforcing discipline within her command. But people were watching her. One afternoon, a young cadet stopped her outside the motor pool. "Mom," he asked nervously, "I just wanted to say what you did. It changed how I think about power, about responsibility." She didn't smile, but her voice softened. "Good," she said. "Just remember, what you do next matters more than what I did." The ripple effect kept going. At the next precinct meeting in Toledo, Chief Marin, a usually stoic figure, stood before his officers and addressed the elephant in the room. "We failed to protect one of our citizens," he said, "a soldier, a leader, and a woman who didn't ask for special treatment, just equal treatment. That should never have been too much to ask." No applause, just nods, maybe even a little shame. But growth often starts with that. Adrienne received a letter in her mailbox one evening. No return address. Inside was a short note. "I was wrong. I saw the uniform and not the person. I'll carry that for the rest of my life. DM, she." Read it twice, then folded it, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it inside her desk. Not for revenge, not for pride, but to remember that the work was far from over, and that even when people fall short, some still try to stand again. The National Federal Oversight Conference in Washington, D.C. wasn't the kind of event Adrienne usually attended. Suits, press, political undertones hidden behind buzzwords like reform and oversight. But this time, they weren't asking her to be a silent figure at the back of the room. They were asking her to speak. She stood backstage, adjusting the collar of her Class A uniform, medals gleaming under the soft hallway lights. Delaney stood beside her, scanning the agenda. "You've got 15 minutes, she said, "but you're the last speaker. That usually means they're expecting something strong." Adrienne gave a short nod. "Then they should be careful what they wish for." Delaney gave her a knowing smile. From the side curtain, Adrienne could see the panel moderator finishing up with a city official from Boston, talking about changes to disciplinary procedures and interdepartmental coordination. It was all good, all necessary, but it was policy talk, clinical, detached. What she had to say wasn't going to be that. When her name was announced, the applause was polite, controlled. A few scattered people in uniform clapped a bit harder, those who knew her or what she stood for. She took the stage, not slowly, not rushed, just steady. Like always. At the podium, she adjusted the mic and began without fanfare. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace, and I didn't come here today to criticize law enforcement or to pretend the military has all the answers. I came here because accountability should never be a dirty word." She let that settle. A few heads nodded, others stiffened. I came here because one night I was pulled over for no reason. I was questioned, dismissed, and treated like I didn't matter, because someone saw my skin before they saw my rank, because someone let power go unchecked. Silence. But this isn't just about one officer. It's about a culture where some badges become shields from responsibility, where silence is normalized, where standing up for yourself is seen as defiance instead of dignity. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I documented it. I took it to court. I won. Not because I wanted a payday, but because I wanted a record. A moment that would say to every person watching, this is not okay. A beat. And more importantly, you don't have to stay quiet. Now the silence was sharp. Uncomfortable, necessary, Adrienne continued. The point of accountability isn't punishment, it's growth. It's about creating a culture where power is paired with restraint, where rank, title, and badge all come with the weight of expectation. And when someone falls short, we don't protect them out of loyalty. We correct them out of integrity. Someone in the back clapped once, then another. Slowly, it spread. Not explosive, not political, just real. Adrienne wrapped up. I'm not here to be anyone's hero. I'm here to remind you that what we tolerate becomes policy, and what we excuse becomes precedent. So don't wait for someone else to take the first step. Be the kind of leader who does it first, and does it right. Then she stepped back. The applause this time was stronger, not overwhelming but full of weight. After the event, people approached her in quiet waves. A young lieutenant from Baltimore, a police academy instructor from Georgia, even a retired judge who simply said, "Thank you for saying what so many of us were thinking." Delaney caught up to her just outside the conference hall. "You did it," she said. Adrienne raised an eyebrow. "Did what?" Made them listen. Adrienne looked past her, out at the Capitol dome in the distance. "For now," she said. "But listening isn't the goal, acting is." Back at Fort Wayne, life moved on as it always did. Training rotations, field ops, a dozen tasks no one outside the base would ever see or care about. But something was different. More cadets asked questions. More instructors brought up ethics, leadership, and culture, alongside weapons handling and chain of command. And Adrienne, she kept doing the work. One afternoon, Sergeant Major Ellis found her in the motor pool, clipboard in hand. "I heard your speech," he said. "You watched?" "Whole thing." Adrienne gave a slight shrug. "Just said what needed to be said." Ellis gave her a look. "You're going to downplay it, but I won't. That speech, it's already being circulated in training academies, civilian and military." She blinked. "Seriously?" He nodded. "They're using it as a case study. Real leadership, real accountability." She was quiet a moment, then said, "As long as they remember it's not about me. It's about the people watching from the sidelines, wondering if they matter." Ellis clapped a hand on her shoulder. "You made them matter." That night, Adrienne sat on her porch, sipping a mug of tea as the sun dropped behind the trees. Her phone buzzed beside her, an email notification. Subject, DOJ Policy Reform. Testimony requested. She smiled to herself, a tired smile. One part peace, one part weight. The fight was still ongoing, but the tide was turning, one voice at a time. 6 months had passed since the trial. The storm had quieted, but the ripples remained. Policy reviews had launched in 3 precincts. Training. Modules had been revised, and Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace had, as always, gone back to work. But on this particular morning, she stood in front of something entirely different. A high school, not a base. Not a courtroom, not a press room, just a regular public high school in Toledo, Ohio. The principal had invited her to speak to the senior class about leadership. She could have said no, she almost did. But something made her pause. Maybe the idea that the next generation needed to hear it before the world taught them silence. Inside the gymnasium, about 200 students sat in folding chairs, half curious, half distracted by their phones. Teachers stood along the back wall. There were no ribbons or medals here. Just her, a simple black blazer, and the words she carried. The principal introduced her briefly, then stepped aside. Adrienne took the mic. "I know some of you are wondering what a soldier is doing in your school," she said with a small smile. I'm not here to talk about war. I'm here to talk about something a lot harder. Knowing who you are when no one's watching. A few heads looked up. She continued. I stood up to someone in uniform once. Not an enemy on the battlefield, but someone who wore the same flag I do. Someone who forgot what that flag is supposed to mean. Now they were listening. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I told the truth. I showed up. I didn't do it because I was brave. I did it because I was tired of staying quiet when I knew better. She looked across the rows of faces, some still skeptical, some leaning forward now. And I'm here today because you're going to face moments like that. Maybe not in a courtroom, maybe not with a badge or a uniform, but you'll be tested. Someone will underestimate you. Someone will cross a line. Someone will ask you to be smaller than you are. A pause, and you'll have a choice. Stand firm or stay silent. She stepped forward just a little. Let me tell you something. Silence might keep the peace in the moment, but it doesn't build the world you want to live in. Now it was quiet, really quiet. The truth is we don't need more people who follow orders blindly. We need people who ask better questions, who lead when it's hard, who protect others even when no one's clapping for them. She set the mic down gently, not dramatically, just with intention. Be one of those people. Later that day, as she walked out to her car, a girl from the crowd jogged up behind her. Lieutenant Colonel Wallace. Adrienne turned. The girl looked nervous. 17, maybe 18. I just wanted to say thank you for saying what you said. I've been trying to figure out if I should report something that happened to me. Adrienne didn't press, didn't ask what. She just said, you already know the answer. You just needed to hear someone say it out loud. The girl nodded, eyes stinging with unspoken things. Whatever you decide, Adrienne added, make sure it's from strength, not fear. The girl smiled. Yes, ma'am. Adrienne watched her walk back toward the school entrance. Sometimes the battle wasn't about courts or policies or headlines. Sometimes it was about one girl deciding not to stay quiet. And that was enough. Back at Fort Wayne that night, Adrienne sat at her desk reviewing a training proposal. It was late. The office was empty, but she didn't mind. This was the work, the part no one saw. The part that mattered. Pinned to the wall beside her desk was a photo from her early days, her in desert camo, sunburnt, grinning, surrounded by her first team. Next to it, a copy of the court ruling. Below that, a handwritten note from a recruit. That reads simply, "Thank you for showing us how." She smiled to herself. She wasn't done. The work would never be done, but it was in good hands now. And tomorrow, she'd lead again.